So hi everybody, this is Time to Talk with Cognitive Sports Therapy, and you have myself, Dr. Claire, and Lucy here today. And we are, if you follow us on social media, we are doing all our posts this week on sleep, because yesterday was World Sleep Day. And sleep is massive. It's one of our most popular topics when we talk about it, Lucy, isn't it? People want to hear about it. They always want to hear about it because it impacts on all of us. As you just before we came on said that you'd obviously had struggled with your sleep fairly recently. So it impacts on all of us. We know it impacts on our mental health. We know it impacts on our physical health. So it's something that we all want to try and do well.
Yeah.
And there's more and more information, I think, out there, and I guess social media is around us more, so we can kind of have these little videos and educational moments, which is great. And I think whenever we were talking about doing this session, I was quite keen. We try and keep these to 15 minutes. Our time has changed over here, and it's not in the UK, so I am kind of going to definitely keep this to 15 minutes, but try and put across as much information as possible. That we would try and run through really what is at the heart of CBT for insomnia, because we know, and it keeps coming up, I've been listening to lots of things in the lead up to today for us as well. There is an amazing Food Medic podcast that's out at the minute. If Food Medic generally does great podcasts, but she has one on sleep, and it's the sleep scientist who is on there, and she does all the information around sleep science. But she says herself in that podcast that the best thing for insomnia is CBT for insomnia, and we offer it at CST. So we were going to run through what we do as part of that, Lucy, weren't we? You and I do it as a joint clinic, and hopefully maybe have a wee bit of space for a bit more chat around that. But do you want to say anything at this point? There's a dog.
I need to let him out. I'll be back in a sec.
Okay, I'll start. So CBT for insomnia gets written about with an 80% success rate when it comes to insomnia. So I think lots of us, when we struggle with our sleep, we think we're stuck with it. We've always never slept and we're never going to get any better. There's a lot of hopelessness that comes, I think, with insomnia. People have
really hopeless. Yeah,
give up.
Awful. Yeah.
But CBT with insomnia, 80% success, which I think is remarkable. It is seen as being better than all the drugs that you can get. So people come to me all the time asking for just some short sleeping tablets, doctor, and often I give them, but it's not the thing that's going to fix insomnia as a long-term thing. They're great in the short term, but not long-term. We know they're addictive, and hypnotherapy and things like that. People try it, but again, the statistics aren't so good. So CBT for insomnia is top apparently at the minute. And I'm going to try and put across all the information for this. I did this with you quite recently, didn't I, Lucy?
Yeah.
But there are nuggets in there, aren't there? And I've done these sleep videos before. Again, you can go back and watch some of our videos from before that we did on sleep. And I've done this training since I did those videos. So this trumps it, I guess. This is up-to-date knowledge. So there are three key things that I'm going to say, and then I'm going to hand over to Lucy to give her part to this, because I think it's where what we do links together really nicely. Number one, when it comes to our sleep and getting good quality sleep, we want to make our body clock work for us. So that's our circadian rhythm, and that's our kind of hormones with our cortisol in the morning and our melatonin at night. And again, in that last podcast I listened to, the crux of our good night's sleep starts in the morning. Doesn't start at nighttime. It starts with what we do in the morning. So we want to be getting up at the same time in the morning as much as possible, and going to bed at the same time as much as possible in the evening. This is what I think you do best in the world, Lucy. So having those routines around our beginning and end of our day is so important to get our cortisol and our melatonin levels right for us. But the other way we can make that body clock work for us is also getting daylight first thing in the morning. So as soon as we can, getting out and getting into daylight gets your cortisol doing what it should be doing, and also will help your melatonin do what it needs to do later on at night. The kind of screen time kind of comes into that. So we know a little bit, if we have too much light in the evening or later on at night, that might stop or delay the onset of melatonin at night. But actually, the science behind screens and things isn't as big as we thought. So you need to be a wee bit careful, but the biggest thing is actually daylight in the morning sort of trumps everything. So that's number one, that's our body clock. We hear about that a lot. The second one I don't know that we do hear so much about is our sleep drive. So we spend all day building up something that's called our sleep drive. It's adenosine is the chemical in our body, and we want to build up enough adenosine to tip us over into sleep at the time that we need to go to sleep at bedtime. And the way we make that work for us is by being active in the day, and also by not bringing forward our bedtime. So if we go to bed too early, actually we will have used up some of our sleep drive, and we won't go into as good or quality sleep as we would do if we go to bed at a normal time. So actually, you're better kind of sitting up, keeping yourself awake as much as possible, and then going to bed at the time that you would normally do, and keep active during the day. And that's the second one. And the third thing in this list, and this is where Lucy, I'm going to stop talking for a little bit and let Lucy do some talking here, is to do with this conditioning response that we have for our beds. So our brain becomes used to what our bed is for, and if we end up spending long periods of time lying awake in bed, then our brain starts to think our bed is not for sleeping. So what we need to try and do is to retrain our brain into realizing our bed is for sleeping. And one of the things that we can do around this is by doing a really good kind of lead up to bed, so that our body starts to become triggered into knowing that it's time to go to bed. And one of the things we call that is creating a bit of a buffer zone between the busyness of your day and going to sleep at nighttime. And this is where I think breath work comes into play. And Lucy, maybe you could talk a little bit about how you would suggest using breath work to create that buffer between our day and sleep.
Yeah, so it kind of it's where the nervous system really comes into play at this point, because what we want to do is use our breath to affect our nervous system to prepare our body for sleep, right? So when you're going about your day, when you're in meetings and when you're working and you're not really focused on your breath, and when you're doing a lot of talking, you're essentially over breathing. So you're breathing quite quickly, you're not breathing with any kind of awareness. And what this can do is sort of put you into more of a fight and flight mode. And so it's really important to recognize when you've had long periods of not being focused on your breath, that actually doing some breath work, and breath work, I don't mean anything fancy, I mean just breathing through your nose, breathing lightly, and breathing full rounds of breath. Literally that's breath work. But what this will do is it will start to sort of reduce the stress hormones, and it will reduce the heart rate, and it will put you into more of a rest and digest branch of your nervous system. So the first thing I always say to people is, once you need to look for these natural pauses in your day. So let's take working, for example. You're finishing work, say you're working from home, you switch off the computer, and before you get up and do anything else, do 10 rounds of breathing in for 4 and breathing out for 4. That's a really nice balancing breathwork practice that will really balance you out. So that's number one. And then as you get more towards bedtime, what we want to do, I mean, everyone that I work with, every single person says they experience being wired and tired. So feeling absolutely exhausted at the end of the day, but totally unable to relax. And very often it's because they're constantly just in their fight and flight branch of their nervous system. So when we breathe, say 4 to 6 breaths a minute, that's your balancing breath work. That's what you do after work, 4 to 6 breaths a minute. When you get more towards bedtime, you want to cut that down even more to less than 4 breaths a minute. So this is where your really long exhales come in. So you breathe in for 4 and you breathe out for 8. And what this does is it really amplifies the body's relaxation response. It really amplifies that rest and digest branch of your nervous system. And so before you go to bed, or when you're thinking about getting ready for bed, try to build in a few rounds of this breathing practice before you go and get into bed. And I would say to do, 5 to 10 rounds if you can. And if an 8 count exhale feels too long, you could start with 6. But what you want to do, if you think about when you're going through your day, how many of this do we have compared to how many of this do we have? And what we want towards bedtime is more of that kind of exhale, that big sort of sighing release, letting everything go. So definitely use your breath work between work and home life. And then as you start to move towards bedtime, become aware of your breath. So when you're doing your evening, sitting on your sofa or whatever it might be, think about, how's my breath? How quickly am I breathing? How does that make me feel? And just try to breathe less. So breathe deeply, but breathe less. So slow down how many breaths you take a minute, and that will really help.
And I think I cut off, and I don't sure whether in the midst of what you were saying, but did you say for the 4-7-8 breath technique? Is that what you were talking about there? Just
4-8 breath. Sorry, did I cut off?
I don't know whether it was my end or your end, but just to clarify.
Yeah, so breathe in for 4, breathe out for 8. It's so simple. You don't need to have a breath hold in there to make an impact for preparing the body to sleep. Just in for 4, out for 8. Think about double the amount of exhale compared to inhale. So whatever you breathe in for, breathe out for double. But 4-8 is a really good balance, because that will take you to about 4 breaths a minute. And we know when we're breathing 4 breaths a minute, we're telling our body it's relaxing time. It's preparing the body for sleep. And you could couple that with some nice stretches too. That I always say it before bed, to do some nice simple stretches with that breath pattern. It's really, really powerful.
Nice. And this is the kind of, as we're saying, we're just talking about your body kind of getting used to, or your mind getting switched on to the fact that it's time to go to bed. So there's sort of routines to do in almost in the same order as you're kind of getting ready to go to bed. And we've talked a bit about whether to do it in bed or not. My take generally from what I'm learning through the CBT for insomnia is to pull it out of the bed. But I know some people do their breath work in bed. And if it works for you, this whole conversation is about people who are struggling with sleep. If you find that you do breath work and you do it in bedtime, stick with it. We're all unique, and this is not necessarily for changing bedtime routines or what you do if you don't struggle with sleep. But the conditioned response to do with being in bed at night to do with sleep is to try and do everything outside of the bedroom. So not to be doing reading in bed. I'm sorry, I know a lot of people like to read in bed, not watching TV in bed, and trying to avoid long periods of time when you're lying awake in bed, not sleeping. And that can come into play with a lot of patients I work with who are sort of menopausal, they're having night flushes, or people who struggle with PTSD. Often they might have bad nightmares or dreams or anxiety attacks at night. The best thing you can do if you wake up at night is to pull yourself out of bed, create yourself a nice space that is away from bed, and we call it like a nest. Create a little nest. Yeah. You can practice the breath work that Lucy is talking about. That's exactly the right thing to be doing then. You can pull out a book. I don't mind that at all. You want to try not to overstimulate your brain, so I would probably avoid a screen. But doing something that is away from the bed is the best thing to do at those moments of time, rather than lying awake at night and worrying about not sleeping, which often perpetuates the problem. And you might say to me, but I'm not getting enough sleep. But the last thing I want to do is get out of bed, because then I'm going to sleep even less. If you can think about this as being a little bit of short-term pain for long-term gain, you're watching this program because you're struggling with your sleep. And what has been shown is if for 2 weeks, it only takes 2 weeks, if you can start to practice this technique of getting out of bed and creating a nest, doing calming things and getting back into bed, you will find that you will stop having those long periods of time where you're lying awake in bed and panicking.
Yeah, and it does. I did it recently. I had some sleep issues, which is something that I never have, and I like to pride myself on how good I am at
Yeah.
doing all of the right things, but it sometimes happens, and I followed all of this, and it does work. And it, you know, I think the biggest thing that you said also recently that helped me so much was, it's not about how many hours sleep you get necessarily. And that's huge, because when you're struggling with your sleep, you're bombarded with messages of how important sleep is and how important 8 hours is, and none of that is helpful when you then feel like, well, I'm doing so much damage to myself. Then it perpetuates this kind of anxiety that often comes with not being able to sleep. So to hear someone say, actually, don't worry about your 8 hours or your 7 hours. You want to get good quality sleep, and then focus on how you feel the next day. You know, we know some people need more or less sleep, but again, that kind of language is so helpful coming from a doctor when somebody is struggling with sleep, to just reassure them that, you know, just scrap that, don't get hung up on it. Yeah, exactly.
And the other thing on that, I probably would just say an extra little tiny bit, is to avoid the trackers. I'm hearing good stuff about an Aura ring, which has come out, that it probably is one of the best in the market, but actually pretty much all of them still do not do a great job of tracking our sleep. And if you're looking at those numbers, again, it gives you something to be anxious about. So avoid it. Don't worry about the time of that you're sleeping. Just think about the quality. And just in summary, so think about your body clock, keeping that routine, avoiding those lie-ins at the weekend if you can do. Think about it almost as jet lag. If you start switching around your times, think about getting daylight in the morning, think about being active during the day, not bringing forward your bedtime, and then all those kind of nice buffering things we can do, switches on our brain to realize that it's bedtime. And then again, thinking about your breath work and slowing it down, and taking yourself out of bed whenever you're not sleeping at night, and to try and break that cycle of lying awake for long periods of time. And just really aware of our time here. So if anyone has got any questions, we're always happy to be contacted, aren't we, Lucy? We do run a sleep clinic, whereas
the sleep clinic is great.
A combination of appointments with myself and with Lucy, really, as I say, can be really helpful if you really struggle with this, just having someone actually have a look at your sleep diary with you and work out the best way of kind of getting on top of your sleep, because as we say, it impacts on everything, and that's why we're also interested in it. But
but we can definitely help.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Lucy, for joining me. Thanks for listening, everybody, and have a good week, and I'll see you next week. Take care.
See you soon.
Bye. Bye.